on this week's episode of TalkStone.
Everything HCT Asia Pacific Fall Playoffs.
Alexander, quote, Raven, unquote, Baguley in studio.
And as always, Dan, we present this week's well-played moment.
Everybody get in here. Let's break down all the esports action. Welcome to TalkStone, your premier source for all things competitive Hearthstone news and analysis. This week we have another special edition of the HCT Playoffs as Asia Pacific closed last weekend. My name is Frodan. I'm joined by TJ Sanders, my co-host, and Raven. So let's talk a little bit about how HCT Playoffs have been. We'll talk to our guest first, Raven, since you're here. How has the past couple weeks been for you from Europe now to Asia Pacific?
It's been really good. We've mixed up the timing that we do. We do normally America's second, but yeah, starting with Europe is always nice. Starting with the best region overall seems like a good way to kick it off. But yeah, I think Asia Pacific specifically impressed this past weekend.
Are you sure about what you just said? Because Asia Pacific fielded quite the four players that'll be joining us in the Fall Championship. We have Blood Trail, who's making a second back-to-back championship appearance for 2018. Aku Maker, who's always kind of been one of the top players from Australia and always threatening the region. Rivius, who is just a living legend.
Just beautiful. Rivius.
And then Tyler, I guess since he moved from Europe to Asia Pacific, everyone already knew how good of a player he was, and then in his first season being able to make that deep run.
He's moving back next week.
Sure.
Job accomplished. I just want to point out that in the past, we always looked at Asia Pacific as kind of, at least their playoffs, as like the third tier, right? Everybody says like Europe was the best, America's the second, and Asia Pacific always had these crazy lineups, these suboptimal plays, and we didn't really see that this weekend. I feel like what we saw, at least on stream, was solid play, players innovating with deck lists in a crazy way, but a crazy way that worked, specifically speaking about Rivius. And just good Hearthstone, good quality Hearthstone across the weekend. And that's not always what we get with Asia Pacific, and it's really refreshing to see. And also, Asia Pacific's point total to qualify was 34 points.
Yeah,
That's the closest they've ever been to Europe, who was at 39, and the furthest away they've ever been for Americas, which was 27. So Asia Pacific as a region is just getting more and more competitive. And
Absolutely.
Is it related to Korea fielding almost half the players in Pacifics?
So. I do think so. One thing that specifically the Eastern Asian countries are really well known for are grinding. They talk about Europe and how hard and competitive it is, but if you just look a little bit outside of Hearthstone, just look at, Heroes of the Storm, Overwatch, StarCraft, etc. It's just Korea and China, like these countries specifically are known for being extremely competitive and putting in incredible hours day to day. So I anticipate that trend continuing. It wouldn't surprise me in a couple years or somewhere down the road that Asia Pacific will be like one of the hardest regions out there in terms of point thresholds for playoffs. That being said, I also think that some of these players do represent exactly what we're talking about. Asia Pacific, year over year, since the very beginning, started off as the region that people joked about the most, to now being one of the hardest ones to qualify for. Blood Trail is, I think, good representation of that. You look at how last season in the Summer Championships, he did really bad at the world stage there. And when I say bad, I mean like you could tell that he was being visibly shaken by how things were developing. There was a moment specifically that stuck out to me and Brian Kibb when we were casting when he picked Prince Keliseth off-stitch tracker. Yeah. And obviously we've all messed up that interaction the first time we thought about it, but he actually did it on the big stage. And then afterwards, all the dominoes started falling. Like he had an opportunity to play Prince Keliseth when he drew it naturally to recruit a minion, but then he recruited first, then played Keliseth, and that ended up mattering for trades. So, everything kind of went as a disaster. But now he's back in this playoffs. He actually played a lot better, and he brought a very unique lineup, too, by just playing a very slow, anti-control combo lineup. That's one of the harder ones to play in this game.
I think what it felt like for championships for Blood Trail was someone had given him a lineup that said was good, right? It's like, this lineup's great, and it may well have been, but it just happened to be that it felt like they were decks that Blood Trail himself had not played that much of. So it's like, this deck is good, but without the experience behind it, you do things like Keller said. You might not make the right zombies, for example, with the hunter, and that's something you get by just a lack of an actual experience of playing the deck yourself.
Yeah.
So it did feel like he was like given the deck, saying this will be great. It's like, well, yeah, in a vacuum it is, but when you don't have the experience of zombies, for example, you just forget there are certain combos you can make. Well, that's when you fall apart in these high-pressure matches.
Also, I think it was also a matter of a shy, introverted guy who had never been to the United States before comes and plays on a pretty big stage in front of a lot of viewers with a lot of build-up to it, right? We fly the players out a week early. They have to sit in interviews, do these media pieces. It's a lot. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot to distract you from the games. And maybe he just wasn't ready for that type of stage.
There's a funny story, actually, too, to wrap up a little bit of Blood Trail's discussion here. TJ forgot Blood Trail was in playoffs when we were factoring in stuff because he registered with his Chinese name, his Mandarin name, and we looked at it like English phonetics, like alphabetically, whether or not he was in it. So TJ's like, "Oh, Blood Trail's not in it," and I'm like, "No, Blood Trail's in it." And we kind of debated for a little bit, and so whether or not he even had like we even weren't sure if he was in the playoffs, and let alone he was able to rampage through yet again a second season back to back. And I don't believe this has ever been done by anybody in Asia Pacific since Handsome Guy, when the rules were different, where they took the #1 points leader every single season to come back. So this is quite the feat. We saw it like with Naogi Dan in the previous season, and we saw it with George C. in Europe. 2 back-to-back championship appearances is nothing short of incredibly impressive.
Yeah, that's right.
And especially because of the first 2, there's a chance he can do all 3 as well. So
in the same year.
Yeah, within the same year, you can just hit every single playoffs. And to be honest, with the improvement from championships to this one, it's not even that unbelievable that he could make it again. He seems to be a new reckoning force for Asia Pacific.
Yeah. But I think we can transition to Rivius now, because I've been waiting to talk about this all weekend. Rivius seemed like he had, hands down, the best lineup for the field. And that's not something we can say for playoffs very often, because usually it's like a handful of players that have the good lineup. Nobody brought this lineup.
What's really funny, too, is that it was an extremely unique lineup in the sense that no one else brought anything close to what he did.
Yeah.
Some people brought a Mech-Cthulhu deck. Some people brought, sort of, the all-in anti-control stuff. But Rivius ended up having a very clever setup that Sato talked about a lot. And also, when we were making predictions, I wanted to pick Rivius, but he was already off the board, so it just makes a lot of sense. Where he brought, a fairly consistent idea of what other people are playing, which is, Malagos Druid, some kind of control warrior, usually odd.
Yeah.
And then even Warlock and Control Priest. Yep. Really good lineup, but then he also had these different top-end solutions by having Mech-Cthulhu, so that in case he ran into those control lineups, he would have inevitability over his opponent. And ended up working fairly well. Funny enough, a lot of the times we saw Rivius needing to rely on Mech-Cthulhu, he didn't actually win.
Yes.
But
the ones we saw on stream.
Right, the ones on stream, that we saw. But we also saw what it could have done if he played a little bit more clean, with some of the turns being more efficient. He just had some problems where he couldn't dump his hand enough, or things just didn't go his way. So, what's really scary about that lineup is he could even perform better.
Right.
Even though it, basically swept most of the field.
He only lost 1 match, and that was in the top 8, and then he still qualified in the decider match.
Yeah. Right.
I think what impresses me the most, and why I like the lineup, and what's funny is I've not actually told any of you guys this. I actually did my predictions before all you guys, right? I got in there first with my first 2 choices.
Surrender, first pick, auto pick.
It was, but I was looking at Rivius' lineup, and he's obviously just a good player. We know this anyway. I almost picked him.
Just
and
for
then
me?
didn't.
Sure.
Well, no. Honestly, because of the Mech-Cthulhu's, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
I nearly picked him, but didn't. Went for Surrender. Turned out to be a bit of a mistake in the end. But I will say, anyone who gives a Control Warrior deck that normally has no real win condition, a way to actually finish a game is good in my book.
Well,
because that's the one thing that has always stressed me out about Odd Warrior is you can't really ever finish up a game. It goes to super late fatigue, or there's really weird things you have to do. But I will say it was impressive, and also a bit of a surprise that none of his teammates brought anything like this.
Right.
What must have that discussion been like? Oh, I want to bring Mech-Cthulhu for this. No, it's a bad idea. Oh, I'm doing it anyway. It's okay.
I think that is kind of the conversation. I hung out with Rivius when I went to HCT Seoul earlier this year, and he was with his teammates hanging out, and they were talking. And that is kind of their dynamic from what I've gone from, where they
just
basically
call each other bad.
Yeah, they just make fun of each other and call each other idiots the entire time. And also, Rivius is very, very loud, not only in his expression for Hearthstone, but also in karaoke. Just want to point that out. This guy has some pipes.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll get to see some of that.
I hope we show that on the tour. Probably too late because they already showed the solo episode. But
I'm sure he'll be back at other tour stops, and of course we'll see him at Champs. So
we'll take him to karaoke.
Yeah,
when he comes to
Just
Champs.
find one.
Brian Kibler also enjoys some karaoke.
Yep.
So maybe we'll get a Doc Rivius Brian Kibler duet.
Probably to Brian Kibler's own parody songs.
That's very Brian Kibler to go to karaoke but sing
your own
his own
music.
song. But yeah,
Did you know he has recordings of these songs on YouTube? You can check them out.
Yes, very much so. And one thing about Asia Pacific is how expressive they are. So it feels like Tyler fits really well because outside of Blood Trail, the three people that we have remaining, Aku, Rivius, and Tyler, they're all very emotionally expressive on camera, and I love that. It's so fun. Just taking a second to talk about Tyler, too. Just how heartwarming was it? I was there talking to him in the interview, but how awesome was it to see him make that breakthrough? We haven't had too many pop-offs very similar to what Tyler was able to express, and it was really a nice moment for me personally. I don't know what you guys felt about it.
yeah, it was a really cool thing to see hard work pay off, and that's kind of something we throw around a lot as casters, especially because a lot of players work hard. It's not to take anything away from all the other players in playoffs who did work hard and didn't qualify. So it's a little bit of like a stereotypical thing to say as a caster on a Blizzard official podcast,
Right.
but he has been. Like, there was times when he was rank 1 on all 3 servers simultaneously, been grinding the ladder for years, and finally pays off. And it's not even like people will meme about it and say, oh, he went to Asia Pacific because he wanted the easier road to qualify. But it wasn't, because this was an Asia Pacific field that we have not seen before. It was super competitive. His points total still would have qualified him for Europe, just to clarify that as well. And so I think it was a really cool story.
There's just a couple of things there as well. So about the strength of Asia Pacific, I think, in my opinion at least, America's region have to do something quite incredible to make APAC not the best lineup going into championships. Because to me, those 4 are terrifying compared to Europe so far, at least. And that's me being biased with Europe as well. So I will say as well for Tyler, though, like you said, a lot of players work hard, but some of the facts is Tyler quit his job a couple of years ago to pursue Hearthstone full-time, started his stream. His stream grew because it wasn't any crazy gimmick or anything too nutty. It was, he streamed a lot, he played very well, and he got the finishes. You can't ask much more than that. And now he's finally getting to the championship, so the chance at Worlds is pretty huge. It's just a great overall story, and I think when the Hearthstone community is just unanimously happy for someone doing well, that's when you know they've earned it.
You can't be upset at Tyler's story whatsoever. And when you talk about hard work, you just look at Tyler, and he is probably one of the extreme examples on the spectrum of how much people are playing. A lot of people are putting in the time and the effort, but Tyler has some of the most games logged, some of the most hours just playing and streaming. And, it also goes to the fact where people made fun of him for a while for not having results.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's kind of where it adds to it. That's why some people, they've put in the time and the effort, but Tyler's gotten mocked, labeled as just a grinder, not necessarily a person as an actual threat. And, that eats at you after a while. First, it's jokes, all fun and games. Ask Raven, First, you're just kind of laughing along, and then slowly the soul and the life dies in your eyes. And then you're doing a podcast on TalkStone.
Yep, and I had to sit down with them and have a very serious talk, and you'll notice it's been lessened as of late.
I think we've just got
mainly because we got Derek in.
Yeah, mainly because we got Derek in. That's
we have a new whipping
no longer
boy.
the punching bag.
Yeah.
Absolutely fine.
Also, Tyler did it with a lineup that I don't think many people expected to do that well.
Right.
He had sort of an aggro lineup, but he had Even Warlock thrown in. Even Warlock did perform really well, but a lot of the aggressive lineups like Secret Hunter and Oddbro did not perform that well across the field because the players that ended up emerging towards the top, like going into day 2, the 6 or 7 players that we had at 5 or 1 or better, a lot of them had control lists that were targeting those aggressive styles of decks, and so Tyler being able to navigate his way through that field ended up being also even more impressive because of the fact that we wouldn't have pointed at his lineup as one of the best in the field at the very beginning.
Yeah, it was a hybrid lineup, and I feel like it's, we keep saying this, but it's disingenuous to just call it an aggro lineup because it feels more mid-range than anything.
Sure, yeah.
That being said, you can definitely see like how Conquest is fleshing out here. I don't think I've seen as many reverse sweeps as I did this weekend than any other Conquest tournament so far. It just felt like every series we were casting on stream, half of them were like reverse sweeps. Obviously, this is exaggeration. I'm sure that's not the case necessarily. But even some of the games we were tuning in halfway through the fills, like, oh, this is game 3, game 4, game 5. It felt like a lot of those were reverse sweeps even without context. So it's really crazy to me to see how people are going to the next level of preparation and really showing how some people, they're staying calm, even being down 0-2, because they know that they can like hit this token druid 3 times, or zoo warlock 3 times, or odd rogue 3 times.
I mean, how many times during casting do we say, well, they just got the 2 wins, but this is the one that really matters now because this is the deck they have to get a win with. I think it's very hard at the moment to build a lineup that even with a ban, you're confident against 3 decks of your opponent. Like, that is very, very difficult to do.
Sure. Yeah. And I think the decks that Dan pointed out, I think probably Secret Hunter and Token Druid were probably the 2 decks that ended up being reverse swept the most, that players had trouble finding wins with. The Hunter, because it was just really vulnerable in the early game, and the Token Druid because it just dies to any type of control strategy with AoE, notably the Priest, the Warriors, that kind of stuff. So it ended up being pretty tough, and we saw a lot of Token Druid mirrors is one thing, because a lot of players had Token Druid, and then
61% of the field. I mean,
you're
bound to run into mirrors.
And then both players taking wins with their decks against their counter matchups. Of course, it's inevitably going to go to Token Druid, which is the deck that both players are struggling to win with. And then that matchup in itself is a pretty tough matchup to navigate.
And also as well, you get the lineup of Strong Shell versus Violet Teacher.
Yes.
Those 2 lists clashing. Someone has got an advantage in that matchup if someone's got the Strong Shell.
Yeah, so the players that had the Strong Shell Token Druid and not the full aggressive lineups with sort of the more mid-rangey lineups that Dan talked about. I mean, I would even go so far as to say we didn't even have any full aggressive lineups in this tournament. Because there was very little aggro mage, and a lot of the Token Druids run the Strong Shell package, and then Secret Hunter, I don't think you can qualify as aggro, really.
No, it's not. It tends to want to be aggressive early on, but it still also wants to curve, so it's just kind of a mid-range deck, and also it's a very fluid game plan.
And then its win condition in some matchups is Deathstalker Rexar.
Right.
So it's got this kind of really late game plan against control decks that can still give it a decent win rate against decks that normal aggro decks would barely ever be able to beat.
Yeah. I don't even think there's 4 true aggro decks out there right now.
Well,
I guess the aggro lineup would be like Tempo Mage, Odd Rogue,
Odd Hunter.
Yeah.
And
Odd Shaman, something like that.
Odd Paladin's fairly aggressive.
I mean, then, some of those decks are tempo decks, so
it's really hard, right? Just because a deck can go late doesn't make it not an aggro deck.
Like Murloc Priest
would
be the fourth.
Putting Rexar in that Hunter deck doesn't make it not an aggro deck. It just means it has a tool that allows it to win a later game.
The amount of times that Secret Hunter just gets on the board quick and wins quick are actually quite low, because it all depends on your mulligan. You have like multiple different ways you can go with your mulligan. You can go with the Dire Maul, Crackling Razor Maul, or you can go with Secrets plus Spellstone. And aggro decks like power
dependent, though, right?
Yeah, that's true as well. So it's hard to say, but nonetheless, I think that Tyler had on paper what seemed to be not the best lineup for the tournament, but the decisions that he made with kind of his tech choices, going with Strong Shell Token, going with putting even Warlock in there. He had an aggressively themed lineup that was better against the other aggressively themed lineups. So
I will say, I think this is one of the most memorable tournaments for me, for when like the strength of the good lineup happened, right? We saw it, because we've seen tournaments where people have brought good lineups and just lost, and that's just the way it works sometimes. But we see, Dak Rivius, we see the Priest players do well, we see the even Warlock players do well, because those were the complete correct meta calls, and I don't think we've seen quite as strong a showing from players who have made choices as good as this before, and it's pretty impressive overall.
I would agree.
One thing that's also interesting to note, too, is that along with Warlock and Druid's popularity, two of our players brought Shudderwock Shaman, and that also overperformed relative to my expectations. I think it's largely skewed by the fact that on ladder, Shudderwock Shaman struggles a lot. Tough to mulligan against like all the Warlocks out there, or just Druids in general. So when you're playing like Shudderwock on ladder, you might find that it performs really badly compared to what you see in tournaments. It was the second most winning deck when we checked in on day number 2. I'm not sure how it actually fleshed out, but we knew even Warlock, and we all thought Control Priest would have done really well. So those were our top 3. And Aku brought that in his lineup, and he was piling and winning a lot with it. So I was fairly impressed with how Shaman came up to be. So it's not just Priest and Warrior making moves based off everything, but even Shaman getting into the mix there.
Yeah, and Aku brought like a full anti-control style.
I should have just picked the Q block again, TJ.
Yeah, you should have.
I was just been like, man, Q block's gonna be like this awesome deck for week 1, and then Aku brought Q block, Shudderwock Shaman, and that entire lineup. He also fared very well, and we didn't actually show Aku too much on stream, but his path to get to the top 8 was also pretty intense.
Going into his 8th match, so that was like the decider match or the lower bracket match.
Mm-hmm.
Out of those matches so far, he had 5 3-0s.
Very convincing.
Very convincing.
Very convincing victories.
So he wasn't even like struggling to get through those lineups that were supposed to be good against his lineups.
Yeah.
He was just crushing them. So
and there are also decks that throughout Swiss, like the days are so long that you don't want to be struggling with. You don't want to play 5 games of anti-control decks.
Yeah.
Like that is a large amount of hours put into Hearthstone, and also the longer the games go on, or at least for me personally, I would struggle with this lineup because I think I would just lose focus after so many high pressure games. So the fact he managed to 3-0 so many actually is probably just important for keeping him fresh throughout the 2 days.
Especially if you're Aku Maker, who looks like he's about to die every time he plays
It's
Hearthstone
like
on camera.
Turn 1 pass. Oh my God.
Yeah,
it's like what? He just passed as Druid.
Even when we
he's a very hyper fellow.
Yeah.
Dan and I went to cast HCT Sydney. So it was one of the first tour stops of the year. It was a top 16 cut, so the 16 players that qualified went there. In like his round 1 match, no implications, no nothing. He has plenty of chances to still make it through. Not really any stakes on the line because he's not really playing for points at that stage. Even in that match, he still looked like he was on the verge of a mental breakdown whenever anything went wrong or even right in the matchup for him. So I think that we've seen him on a big stage before. He was at a seasonal champion or a regional seasonal championship in 2016 before he switched over to the global seasonal championships for Asia Pacific. So he has the experience. Mm-hmm. It's just maybe he'll never get over that, and maybe that helps him focus. Maybe being so invested in each of his games of Hearthstone that he plays at a high level helps him.
Yeah, I want to see Aku and Sintolo in the same group.
At the very expressive.
Please make that happen, whoever's in charge. DJ, make it happen.
It's definitely not me. And now it's time for the well-played moment,
where we pick a moment that we saw through any of our matches in the past week or since the last episode that was most well-played. So this week, we picked Equinox. He had some amazing plays this weekend, primarily in his series versus Strike, right, which was the last game. We managed to catch this off of a fill, which I'm glad we did. And it was the initial match for the top 8, which is really important to put him in a position to qualify.
Yeah, that's right. It was a Token Druid mirror. And both players are playing the same type of Token Druid lineup with the Strong Shell Scavenger Forbiddenness Floop package, which just gives you a little bit. Players have decided that the Violet Teacher no good summons is old news, especially in a world of other Token Druids. The Strong Shell Scavenger build gives you a lot more game. And the big part of this matchup is having swing turns with Spreading Plague. Because traditionally, you win this matchup by just Whispering Wood, Soul of the Forest, having a sticking amount of minions, and Savage Roar Branching Paths your opponent in the face. But it doesn't work against other Token Druids because they have the same thing, but they also have Spreading Plague. So this happened in, as Dan mentioned, game number 5, and Equinox is trying to find a way to make sure that he has initiative with Spreading Plague. And he's staring down a pretty meager board from his opponent, with just 2 tokens from Malfurion, 2 of the Scarab tokens from Malfurion, and he just decides to Whispering Woods. That's it. Soul of Force in hand, swipe in hand. He's got removal.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing. He just Whispering Woods. That's
Right.
it.
So there's a lot of layers to this. The first one I want to talk about is generally in this matchup, playing Whispering Woods is a bad idea for a full board because of how much it gets dominated by Spreading Plague. They play Spreading Plague and Soul the Forest. Even if you manage to burst through, you're in trouble. And because you can't kill off your own board very easily because you have your own Whispering Woods or Soul of the Forest tokens, your opponent can get the Stonehills Scavenger initiative. So there's a lot of nuance to that. So the fact that he played Whispering Woods just by itself is brilliant. The second is that he has double Spreading Plague. So what's actually happening is he's mapping out 4 turns in advance. He's anticipating his opponent will respond with Spreading Plague, and then he will Spreading Plague back. And then he anticipates that his opponent might Spreading Plague back again after buffing his board, and then he'll have the final say. So what he's trying to do is set up, a chain reaction here, step by step, where he's mapped out every possibility, and he's doing his due diligence too by making sure to trade just enough that Strike Rate can't ever get full good trades on himself, because he needs to free up his own board space to play the Battle Cry. So this is a really interesting tug of war that's happening based on how expanded or constricted the board state gets. And based off the way things develop, it just kind of has this inevitability to it. And I think that it was a fantastic setup that we don't really get to see that blatant, because I think it's the fact that both players held 20 cards total. So you get to see so many options. But it was fantastic play here from Equinox to see
I think as well, it's this matchup specifically has such a weird history over the past few months, because at one point, this Token Druid Mirror, no one knew how to play it, and I'm talking about some of the best players in the world here. No one knew how to play it, so they just didn't. They just passed every turn they could and played it in a weird fatigue matchup, and then the evolution of that became, okay, maybe instead of playing last, you want to play first. And then how do you set up to beat the Spreading Plague? So this is kind of coming to the end result of what you should do in this matchup if the decks are built how they are. And like you said, it was just a great display of, one, knowledge, and two, having the sort of the determination to just actually pull it off in such a high pressure match, because this was actually game number 5 of this series. So the winner, you put yourself in such a great spot to be able to potentially go to championships.
Yeah, and the way it culminated was Strike Right ended up being able to buff up his board, but Equinox, of course, knew that was going to happen, Spreading Plague himself, and Soul of the Forest at that turn. That way, he could hopefully then trade in his minions next turn on a buffed up Spreading Plague himself, and then Strong Shell Scavenger, plus Floop it to really just drive home the game. So, really nice sequence of events. The forethought to try and set up for, as Dan mentioned, 3 turns, 4 turns, 5 turns in advance. Make sure he's the one that has the initiative with the final Spreading Plague and wins the game because of it. So a very well-played moment.
All right, so coming up next, we're going to talk about the Fall Playoffs preview. Before that, we're going to go to a promo.
Wait. I don't mean to interrupt, but JustSaiyan had one of the best DreamHack performances of all time. There's one more thing that we got to talk about, and that's DreamHack Montreal. I think that we had one of the most stacked top 6 teams that we've seen in DreamHack in a long time, and a very cool story going into the finals as well. And I believe this also means we do need to add a nice little mana crystal onto these subjects, because I'm adding a subject.
How did you know that we weren't going to bring it up at the end of the show, TJ, as a little shout-out?
Because I just knew.
Yeah. Okay.
I somehow knew.
TJ just decided that he wants to talk about it
Premonition.
right now.
Sure.
That's right.
I had the pleasure of watching a lot of Montreal, including the final match, and I gotta say, this tour stop really kind of puts a lot of people who claim Hearthstone doesn't have any consistency to it when it comes to the competitive scene. It really makes you think. You see Hunter Ace, another top 8 performance. He finished in 5th place, tied with 4 other people. Fantastic player. You look at Fino getting to the finals. I mean, actually, I want to even point out that Impact's quietly put on a really good resume for Americas. He got to the finals of Oakland, now to the top 4, and making just deep runs all the time. Just super impressive through and through, all throughout the top 16. And you do have a couple of new players in the mix too, so it's not just like the old boys club. And JustSaiyan taking his first major win as well, which is a really big thing, because he's been getting top 8s, top 4s for a while, and he never actually won that big of a tournament before. There's a lot of reasons why Saiyan winning is really special. first of all, I'm friends with the guy. Love playing games and hanging out with him, and he's helped me a lot prepare for tournaments, so it's really cool to see him get the victory. Another is to see someone finally contend Muzzy for the points leader position in America. This guy, Muzzy, is easily, hands down, one of the best players in Hearthstone of all time, leading Americas in points year after year, and now, coming up to his third year, we thought that Muzzy was running away with the lead, but now Saiyan's catching back up, and it's funny, too, because they're on the same team, and they're also competing in playoffs, so they kind of want to help each other do well in playoffs so that the other player can be in the points leader as a safety net. Really cool race going on. Now it's not just a runaway compared to like what we see in the past, and I can't wait to see how the drama unfolds.
I will say as well, because I did watch probably just like the back end of the last few matches of DreamHack, but that finals, one of the best finals of Hearthstone I think I've seen, to be completely honest, because not only was it two players I have a lot of respect for, Fino and Saiyan, of course. Getting as far as they got again in another tour stop, as we mentioned, is amazing. But that finals was just an emotional roller coaster for me, sitting in my hotel room watching it on my laptop. Never mind the two players that are on the desk, because Fino basically got off to a decent start.
A decent start. He beat two aggro decks with Quest Rogue.
Quest Rogue can beat anything, TJ. That is just normal. But he got off to a decent start. But then we thought, okay, last hero standing. It's open to more sweeps than Conquest. It's going to be a 3-0 final. It's just going to be over. And then it just wasn't. And it kept going on and on and on. And even in the other games, it was just last-minute saves or like game flips from both players. It was incredible to watch.
Yeah, very
really
dramatic.
Was.
Great play too, all throughout. I mean, it like the Quest Rogue looked unstoppable, and even in Game 3, it looked like it was going to be a sweep because you got
Sonya's Shadow Step with
Step.
double South Sea deckhand.
Right,
that was his opening hand.
He finished his quest like very quickly, and yet just somehow ran a little bit of gas, and Hunter just had a little too much pressure.
Yeah.
So really cool series, and I think that also ties in so much because of the tour. We heard Saiyan a lot of times. If you guys didn't even watch the tour necessarily, but you watched like HCT, you saw the commercials where Saiyan's like, Muzzy's always been number one, and I'm going to give him a run for it.
Yeah.
And now he finally has fulfilled that prophecy. It was incredibly prescient words from Saiyan. I think it's one, really cool to see that kind of coming into the mix for Americas, because Americas could use a shakeup at the top.
Yeah.
And then two, because of Temple Storm rivalry with internally now, and then three, because the tour. This is the reason why that series exists, so it can give you a little bit behind the scenes action, make you a little bit more invested in these players.
It's kind of funny because League of Legends has a series called Eyes On that focuses on a few players throughout the LCS, and they have what's called the Eyes On curse, where whenever a player is featured on that show, he always does poorly.
He loses. Okay.
They do poorly. They get benched. What have you?
It's just like Hearthstone caster predictions most of the time.
Except if you're Sottle. And it's funny that he was featured on the tour and then won, like immediately, or whatever the next tour stop or the second next tour stop after he's featured on that. So maybe we have the opposite. Maybe whoever's featured on the tour is just blessed.
Can I be featured as a caster on the tour then?
You absolutely cannot. I'm vetoing that now. I don't have any say in what goes on the tour, but I'm still going to find a way to veto it.
Okay. Sure. You would literally change jobs just to veto it.
Yeah.
Thank you, friend.
And not only does this have implications for whoever's the points leader at the end of the year for their respective regions, it also has implications for Hearthstone Masters and who has the potential to reach that coveted 3-star Masters at the end of the year. Hunter Ace is almost certainly going to take it in probably like a month. He's at 187 points after his top 8 finish. But now Fino's going to be close. Saiyan's going to be close. Muzzy's going to be close. Casey, board control. So many players now, because of their consistency and performance in tour stops and consistency on ladder, probably have a good shot. But America's Playoffs next week is going to tell us a lot about the future of the point standings for the Americas.
There's just piles and piles of evidence of just how good these players are that are dedicating themselves to being pro in Hearthstone. I think they get mocked a lot for their dedication to the game when they say, like, you put so much time and effort in, but you can't be consistent in a card game, let alone a card game like Hearthstone. And yet we have this unfolding before our very eyes when it's the most competitive Hearthstone's ever been. These kind of tour stops, so many good players are going to it. So, part of the thing about card games is like, well, an average player can go up against a top player and still have a competitive win rate. How does that actually create that consistency throughout this entire ecosystem. But despite all of that, they're going to these big open events with hundreds of players, and still we see the same names making it to the top 8, to the top 4. It's just so unbelievable to me that this is happening. But yet, you know, and I'm a caster. I shouldn't be that surprised. I should be like more. It's shocking to me how consistent these guys are.
Should be like, it's all part of the plan.
Yeah, but I'm being very candid here. Like, I didn't expect this kind of streak coming out from a group of players. Maybe from one player. Like, Hunter Ace is an anomaly, but can anyone replicate his success? And then I take a little bit bigger scope out instead of just focusing on him, and I'm like, yeah, like 10, 15 players are doing the same thing. The tide is turning. I think what people have agreed upon is that Hearthstone, like, they went from Hearthstone is 100% RNG to 80% RNG and 20% skill. And every year I think we're going to get closer and closer to weaning down and making that meet somewhere in the middle. And then, TJ, the flippening will happen, where it's 55% skill and 45% RNG.
The flippening.
The flippening. It's coming one day, not this year, maybe not next year.
It sounds like it should be made into some kind of film with a title that.
I'm waiting for TalkStone episode 86, The Flippening. Oh, man.
I won't be in it. I think it's already been
Probably
confirmed. I'm not going to be invited back, so.
We'll see. We'll see how I'm feeling in. All right.
Maybe it'll be not in TalkStone, but in the tour.
Ooh. Actually, I'm going to change the well-played moment to Dan's setup of the tour promo right there.
Well played.
And actually, I'm just going to steal the thunder for you. I'm going to roll the promo myself.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to DreamHack Summer 2018.
The Yongshipping DreamHacks are just the best DreamHacks. It's where it all started.
So many fantastic players out in the audience ready to get playing.
Have you ever worked a real job? Not really. I haven't worked a single day in my life.
Have you been to Sweden before?
No. I know until like Scandinavia at all.
I just never thought I'd be here.
Yeah.
Always love watching the tour, and if you guys want to see it in real time, you'll get to see a little bit of that action this weekend at the Fall Playoffs for Americas. This is the last of the playoffs that we'll be covering. China has wrapped up their top 4, which features a few new faces in Trunks. If you guys remember Trunks, who appeared in a couple championships from the past couple of years. So Americas. Let's talk about who to watch. Maybe some decks or predictions that you guys have, and then maybe a couple of the rivalries that exist. Raven, why don't you start off?
I think who to watch for me, at least, is I kind of just want to keep my eye on the Tempo Storm guys, basically, because Saiyan, for example, straight off the back of a win of DreamHack, we've seen other players in the past, once they start winning, they continue to. I don't think Hunter Ace, ever even needed to start winning. He just was born a winner. But, players like Orange, for example, very streaky player, he goes like back-to-back tournaments of high performances and then might fall off a little bit. So for me, I just want to watch the Tempo Storm guys. And also, as you mentioned, the race for point lead is going to get very, very interesting because this weekend is going to be so influential.
We don't have deck lists yet. I want to preface this conversation by saying that we're recording basically right before deck lists are due and come out.
So we wish we could give you guys a little bit better insight.
Yeah. But I'm sure you guys will see those popping up on social media. But I don't know if you remember, Dan. We had Killing All Day on the show.
Who?
Killing All Day, hashtag YoCad.
Oh, David Acosta.
Yeah.
Yes. Your
That guy.
godson.
World Championship qualifier, most handsome guy in all of Los Angeles, best Hearthstone player in the world. You know him. He said that he made a deal with one of his Twitch viewers that if he qualified for the World Championship,
Right.
that his chat could pick the decks that he would play in playoffs.
But didn't
I was not aware of this.
Didn't he rewrite that and said that we, the casters, get to
He
pick?
did rewrite that and say that we the casters, so we have like a couple hours to put together some deck lists for Killing All Day to play.
Ooh.
So my eyes, of course, they're always on him, on Killing All Day, whenever he participates in the tournament. But my eyes are on him for that reason.
Man, I really wish Whizbang was allowed in tournaments. I would
triple.
Yeah. But seriously, Killing All Day, kind of on the back burner actually, because he's already qualified for the World Championship. It would be a great performance if he made it back to another one. But I like Americas because there's a lot of players that are on kind of these teams that are a little bit less known than, say, like, Tempo Storm, that have these giant practice groups and these big think tanks that come into playoffs with large groups of people with the same exact lineup, card for card. And the thing that I like to do the most is look at which of those groups come out on top as a collective, right? Who had the best think tank? Who had the best practice and the best read on the meta? Not necessarily an individual player, but which of those groups kind of make it to the forefront and have a few players qualify. Killing All Day was kind of part of that story for the last group of Americas, where it was like Tare and Killing All Day and their teammate Lead Paint, who kind of found the lineup with the Quest Rogue plus Cube Warlock. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to, is to see how those groups of players play out, not maybe any individuals.
I also think as well, like, this weekend, for me at least, might be the hardest weekend in terms of lineups to
read.
Because look at, 1 week, for Europe, we saw one set of lineups. Then we saw the counterplay, right? The Priests, the Even Lock, and we saw Mage disappear, right? What do you do for week 3? Which one do you counter, or do you bring something, or do you go like full Rivius and bring something else, and put your own twist on it? Because I expect to see a rise in Mage, because if everyone's bringing Even Lock
and less Secret Hunter, probably
less Secret Hunter, maybe less Token
crazy.
Druid, but perhaps we'll see just as much because it's builds being
good.
innovated. I mean, I saw some new decks being tested out. Show was posting a list of Tempo Warrior, saying it's kind of got the advantages of Control Warrior, removing everything, but you actually have a way to pressure opponents in case you need to do something besides armor up. So maybe some new decks will even surface, which I think would be really exciting to me, because I want to see a little bit more innovation.
Maybe some Mech Paladin.
I think Mech Paladin is very underrated right now.
Yeah, Muzzy brought it to Copa, right?
Copa.
Yeah.
And
Muzzy
it got
brought it
banned.
to Copa, and he was inspired by Jinsu. He said he saw Jinsu streaming, saw him playing Mech Paladin, thought the deck was great, made a few changes, and played it in Copa. Drew bans, crazy deck. Jinsu brought it to Asia Pacific playoffs and went 0-4.
I think it was his build.
Yeah, maybe his build, or maybe just wasn't well positioned in that meta. But Odd Paladin did well in week 1, but bad last week, and we haven't seen any players qualify with, or not many at least, qualify with Odd Paladin in their lineup. Maybe it's time to just bring up Mech Paladin. Maybe it's time to tech it or do something to make it better for the meta.
There are even some players who've been getting finishes with Even Paladin, believe it or not, in the past couple of months. So there's always room in that deck, although obviously it lost Call to Arms. Equality Avenging Wrath is such a powerful tool for, you can clear up token-based boards, or you can just bust control with it pretty easily. So as long as those kind of cards exist, Saronite Chain Gang, Valinir combos, the deck's still around. It's not as powerful, but sometimes you can sneak in a deck like that.
Paladin's a class that is underrepresented for how good it actually can be right now. I think all the hypes in Druid, Warlock, Rogue, and Hunter expect a little bit of movement in that middle class, maybe even, like you said, the bottom class. I'm really excited for just everything you guys mentioned. I mean, you mentioned Saiyan. I think one thing that's really funny, too, is Saiyan kind of got made fun of in the beginning of the year by taking it a little bit easier. Saiyan even publicly talked about how he was putting Hearthstone as a lower priority because he was spending more time in like financial market trades. And then now he's like leading. He not only led Season 1 to become the anchor of USA, but now he's killing it. I also really want to see some of those players who are like on the cups. You mentioned Ture. I think a few other players who have been taking it a little bit seriously, more seriously. I'm looking at guys like Noblord, for example, and I think this kind of meta really favors players like him, which is like late game technical play. I really hope that these guys can get a time to shine. And it's like you said, there's definitely some interesting personalities in there. You're looking at Fibonacci with like Warrior only and somehow making a deep run last season. Will Dog be able to come back and be a little bit stronger, even though, last season he just bombed down championships after making a deep playoff run? It's really interesting to see the field that we got.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, I'd say Purple's one of my favorites to keep an eye on as well, because you never really know what he's going to do. Like, one in interviews, in deck lists, in the games themselves. It's unpredictable.
Right. Or is Firebat going to win another world championship?
Yeah, Firebat's back in the mix.
Yeah.
Putting on his competitive hat after casting DreamHack Montreal. There's a lot of cool stories to pay attention to this weekend in Americas.
Yeah, and when Firebat is in a competitive mindset, there's not much that can stop him. He's
Yes.
still, after all these years, one of the best Hearthstone players in the world.
That does it for us today for this episode of TalkStone. I want to thank my co-host TJ for joining us. Again, TJ, in case you guys haven't heard, or you're new to Hearthstone or the podcast, why are you laughing, man? You know what I'm going to say?
I don't know. Just say it. Just say it.
He's a new father.
I am.
He's spending time away from his newborn son, who just a couple weeks back graced us with his presence.
Yeah.
Derek?
No, Admirable. His other
Oh,
the
okay,
main
sorry.
baby that he takes care of.
It's kind of funny because a lot of the stuff that, we've even joked about, like doing segments on the show with it. Like a lot of the stuff that I have to do for Admirable is stuff that I also have to do for my 4-week-old son. So,
But yeah, thanks for joining us, TJ. We know you're really
Yeah.
busy, and of course, you're leaving your wife back at home, but you'll rush back pretty soon.
Yeah.
Raven, thanks for joining us as well. It's been really
Pleasure.
fun. Always a pleasure to be able to talk to you. So we'll see all of us back in Americas. I think it's the same gang, right?
same
Me,
game.
Kibler,
Yep.
you, Admirable, Sottle, Raven.
Mhm, That's right.
Cool. And then after that, Raven, where are you heading off to?
To be honest, after next week, we're not too many weeks away from championships anyway, so
Yeah.
we've got plenty more Hearthstone coming up. So I'll be back over here again, enjoying those long flights over. But it's always nice to
Yeah.
see you guys, so it's worth it.
Yeah, second week of October is the championship. So
Really? I thought
Yeah.
it was
Yeah,
it was
it's
later than that.
coming up pretty quick after the playoffs end. So we don't really get much of a break. Just enough time to like scramble to get all the players to the U.S. and scramble to get all the deck lists in and scramble to get Brian Kibler.
He is a very elusive person
Yes.
to handle for sure. Next week, I believe TJ will be joined by the huge draw himself,
That's right.
Mr. Nathan.
The Admiral.
Quote, that's Admiral.
That's
unquote,
admirable.
Zamora.
Yeah.
So again, big shout out to TJ and Raven for joining me. You'll be able to find us this weekend for the HCT America's Fall Playoffs on twitch.tv/playhearthstone, and we'll be back next week for another episode of TalkStone to break down the results of that tournament. Stay tuned for the tour episode 3. You can find more episode of TalkStone on twitch.tv/playhearthstone every other week at 6 p.m. Pacific, and the audio version on SoundCloud, iTunes, or Google Play. If you want more Hearthstone esports news, analysis, and updates, check out playhearthstone.com/esports for all things Hearthstone. We'll see you next time in a tavern.